we are really lucky to have two speakers with us today. There's Martin, who is a homeowner in Cambridge, is retired and an enthusiastic DIYer, an experienced volunteer with CCF, and Bart, who is all of the above as well, but not retired. Martin, I will hand over to you now.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Martin Roach, and as you see, I'm going to be talking about draft proofing, actually some insulation in there as well, and ventilation. The title is low cost. Most of it is low cost, but some of it is bigger costs for things like insulation. But anyway, let's move on, and I'll give you a sort of an overview of it. I thought I'd start off with probably what I feel is the most important slide, is why do we go down this road? And, you know, most people are going down because they want to save energy. They want to heat their homes for a low cost and try and control what is a very big household expense. The other reason is just to make it a nice, warm, comfy home. But also it's to actually have a useful living space. Studies have shown that actually most insulation gets done when people extend their house, and that happens for reasons of various lifestyle reasons, families getting bigger, people getting older and wanting a more comfortable house, or just people feeling as they get older they don't want to live so close to other people. So it's kind of a race for space sometimes. And the reason I mention this is that that the most insulation, for instance, and this sort of work, draft proofing, etc., is done when a project goes on. And what I would like to say today is trying to convince you not just to wait for that big project, but be doing some of these things as a path over time. So that you're constantly improving your living space and making it more comfortable and saving yourself some money. The other reason for doing this, a confession here, I give this part of the presentation and I'm kind of jealous of Bart, because Bart does the sexy stuff. He does the controls and the data and stuff like that. And I'm talking about stuffing a bit of insulation into a gap somewhere or other. But then I had a revelation and I realized, no, that's not really what I'm doing here. What I'm doing is I'm actually helping you create a house heat battery, a store for heat. And I'll explain why I mean there. The more, if you look at your house now, in 10 years' time, very likely, the majority of you will probably have a heat pump. There might be some other technologies to come along, but short of having your own nuclear reactor in the garden, you're not going to get a better way of heating your house, a more efficient way than a heat pump, and certainly for cutting carbon use as well. So what I'm telling you today is helping to move your house towards a situation where it can be heat pump ready. I'm not saying don't put a heat pump in before you do this stuff, but this can really help. And there's two ways I want to show you can help. On the bottom left here, you can see a graph. Now, this is of my house. And what I did there is I collected the data to say, how much heat do I have to put into the house based upon the outside temperature to achieve a comfortable temperature in the house? So what I did is I said, I want the house to be at 20 degrees. And if the outside temperature was 0, there was a 20-degree difference that had to be made up by heat in the house. So what this chart at the bottom is showing, it goes from 0 to about 20 plus. 0 means that there was no difference outside from inside. It was 20 degrees outside, 20 degrees inside. The right-hand scale shows that at certain days, I think it was in February, it was -3 outside. So therefore, that's why it shows 20, 23. There's some blue dots on there. And the axis going up is the amount of heat we had to put in the house. And what you'll see is the correlation. The colder it is outside, the more heat you have to put inside. And if you stick a regression line through this, what it shows is to deal with the coldest time, coldest day of the year, we had to have 7. You can see that chart is just about cutting, the line is just about cutting the horizontal, the vertical axis is about 7. You need 7 kilowatts of energy per hour going into the house to keep it at the temperature that I wanted to achieve. And what this magically tells you is when you eventually move to a heat pump, that's the size of heat pump my house requires, a 7 kilowatt per hour heat pump, which is what I got installed. And what you don't want is a 12 kilowatt one, because that will keep on stopping and starting and stopping and starting and be very inefficient. So the more efficient your house is in terms of storing the energy, the smaller the heat pump, the more efficient it'll be and the less it'll cost you in energy. The next chart, if you just click on again, please. The other thing to say why you should do this work as well is that there's some magic energy tariffs coming along now, time of use tariffs. And what that's saying is when you've got a heat pump, if you just use it certain parts of the day, you get a much lower cost of electricity. So again, by having a very efficient house, it enables you to span the time when the electricity is more expensive, heat it when it's least expensive, and you've got an efficient house. It'll keep the energy in there, and you'll be able to actually reduce your heating costs. So that is a big step forward in terms of the attraction of the next generation of heating pumps that we're going to, a lot of us will have to move towards. So I feel this is a really important part of the presentation and why it makes my part much more sexy than it could have been. Anyway, carry on, next slide, please. Okay, so let's start off with drafts. Various means. How do you find drafts in your house? There's various means. Just keep on clicking, please, Fran, and I'll talk to it. The old method, you wet your finger, you'll put your back of your hand up against the window and say, oh my goodness, that's where the draft is coming from. So still a good test. Stick your hand against the window, especially on windy days. You know, where's that draft coming from? You'll soon find out. There's more better technology, new technology coming through, thermal imaging cameras that you can borrow from Cambridge Carbon Footprint. Very useful for finding out where the blue bits are and where the red bits are, so you know where it's hot and where it's cold. And also a pressure test, which is a method of, you'll see them in the bottom right, installing an big extraction fan, a really powerful one that sucks air out of the house. And when that underneath the window, and you can go around the rest of the house and you can feel where the drafts are coming, which room the drafts are coming out of, or which gaps in those rooms they're coming from. So that's another way of locating where the drafts are. And I believe Cambridge Retrofit have some pressure test fans, but they're worth contacting anyway for guidance. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, where do you look for these drafts? Obvious places, doors and windows. So you just have to click on loft hatches, unheated rooms under the stairs. This is a picture of the door to the cupboard under my stairs. And that's, you never really think of insulating places like that, but that's where drafts can come from, unexpected places. Under sinks is a primary one. You've got all those pipes going down. If you've got suspended floors in particular, going down below into a very cold space, gaps are left around the pipes, around cables, and that's where drafts can come up from. My sink in particular, or a couple of sinks in my house, were terrible for letting in that, and that's where the thermal camera came in very useful for identifying that. And please click on, yes, unused chimney. You're probably wondering what this picture's come up, the black one. That is where I coaled the dampener in the fire in the chimney in one of our rooms, because air was coming down from the chimney through the gap there and into the room. So unused chimneys is often an area where cold air can enter your house. Next slide, please. Okay. Oh yeah, sorry, you probably don't quite see it on the bottom, but the other place to look is places you already thought you'd fixed. This is not a one-off, you do this work and it's finished and you leave it and you go away again. You need to keep revisiting to make sure that those drafts that you fixed are still fixed. Okay, more on drafts. Okay, just other areas. You can just keep on clicking on, please, on this one. Ceiling roses around power sockets, gaps between the skirting boards and the floor, between the floorboards themselves. Again, if you can have something like a pressure test in your house, or just using your back of your hand, using these other methods, you can find where these gaps are coming from. But they're all over, and you can imagine how they add up if you take them, the cumulative effect from them. Poor mortar between cracks in walls, letterboxes. It's coming to the time of year now where I need to put that insulation on the outside, on the inside part of my letterbox, because the draught will be coming in there. So, and keyholes is another one. Just putting your hand up against the keyhole in a door and feel if you can see a draught coming through. So first of all, you've got to find the draughts, and you've got to do something about them. So next slide, please. Okay, so window drafts, various methods, adhesive foam strips, brush strips from Miton. Our big plug here for Miton over towards Saffron Walden. It's a wonderful place for getting these sort of things, for insulating sash windows and opening windows, as hinge windows as well. So that's fixing the drafts. Then for actually improving the insulation, there's various methods. The first step I would say is secondary glazing, which you can either use as a film that you can put across the window, or you can actually go to magnetic glazing, which I did about, I guess it was about 13, 14, 15 years ago now. And it was a great solution, and it worked for me for probably about 10 years. And then that's before I went on to get the house triple glazed, or the equivalent to triple glazed. So there's good suppliers around here. Magna Glaze, I say there. Or you can do on the left-hand side, you can see you can use a film to put across, which are available from places like B&Q, etc., for giving you a secondary level on the glazing as well. The middle one, you can see the magnetic glazing, and then on the right-hand side, you can see the brush strips. So next one, please. Door drafts, how do you fix those? Again, you can get rolls of various rubber adhesive strips, and there's various ones depending on how big the gap is, so-called E1s, P1s, etc. But if you go into any reputable store, or like Mackay's for DIY, you can get good systems that can either be stuck on or screwed on. Ones for putting on the bottom of the doors. I even put them on some of the doors within the house as well, because you know, the argument is that you want to actually insulate the envelope of your house and therefore live comfortably within it. But if you're sitting down in the lounge in the evening and you're sedentary, draft coming under the doors can be a bit disconcerting. So sometimes it's worth putting these within the house as well. I talked about letterboxes before, stopping them, the air coming in that way. I prefer flaps myself rather than the brushes, because the brushes, they tend to bend and after a while become less effective. And keyhole covers are available as well. Next slide, please. Okay. Oh, your little one went to the air there. Don't forget your loft hatch. People will maybe pat themselves on the back and said, I've insulated my loft hatch. I put some insulation above it in the loft, but you've also got to seal the gap around. So treat it like a door, put some rubber sealant around it so that when it closes, you've got a very good seal there. Look at floor skirting boards. I made a big mistake here when I'll talk a little bit later about underfloor insulation, but one of the things I didn't do so well is seal the gaps as well, which is a very important part. Gaps probably end up giving you about 50% of the heat loss. So you go and insulate something and you think you've done the job, but if you don't close the gaps, you're not going to get the efficiency that you expected. So skirting boards, between floorboards, using fillers, and it can be either a caulk filler, it can be expanded foam, depending on how big the gap is, and then chimney sheet for putting up chimneys that are disused chimneys, unused chimneys, to close those gaps off as well. Thank you. Okay, and I can give you some links here. If you're interested in any of these things, please come back either in the Q&A, or if you want to email me, I'll happily share not only the links, but some of my experiences as well. Okay. Okay, within the living space, loft and pipes and cylinder insulation. Like I say, the aim is to actually insulate the envelope of where you're living. If I click on, and let's start off with the loft, which is really probably in any house is the big saving if you haven't done it, or even if you haven't got the full sort of 300 millimeters of insulation. But that's your aim, is to get 300 mils up there in your loft. But on the other hand, we do tend to use lofts for storage as well. And the key here is to minimize the storage, site the storage away from the walls, because you can, if there's a lack of movement of air, you can start to get condensation on the rafters, etc. So try and pull the storage together. Don't block the eaves, but don't leave cold corners. Good example here, my daughter has a house down in Hertfordshire, and she was getting mold in the top corners of the bedrooms. And we tracked it down to the fact that the insulation wasn't well installed in the corners as well. So you don't want to block the eaves, but you don't want to leave cold surfaces as well, which will attract condensation. If you're going to use insulation storage, your loft for storage, then you can get legs to put boards on top of that lifts up the storage, and then you can insulate underneath. So that's worth doing as well. And I've talked about insulating your loft hatch, and carry on, please. And inside the house as well, if you've got hot water pipes, it's worth insulating those. You could argue the heat from those is coming to the house anyway, so what's the big deal? But the main way I look at it is heat that's not in the right place when you want it is inefficient heat. So you don't want to be using your hot water pipes for heating the house. You've got radiators for doing that. And also you've got hot water pipes that are leaking heat. They're doing it 24 hours a day. So if it's hot and it's in the airing cupboard or above your cylinder, insulate it. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, window insulation. Right, I talked a bit about, you just click on through this and I'll speak to it. Film across, adhered to the edges of the window. It's temporary, but it's effective, it's low cost, but it is fragile as well. Secondary glazing I talked about. You can install secondary glazing for, if you do it yourself and get Perspex as your secondary glazing, you can probably do it for around about £80 a square metre. So it's not cheap, but it's not expensive. It's effective in terms of reducing noise. And like I said, I did most of my house at one stage. But then you might want to move on to the next level, which is double glazing. A lot of people will have their double glazing installed by taking out the old windows and putting new ones in. If you've got good wooden windows, I would say it's worth getting double glazing units installed rather than ripping out what is probably perfectly adequate and expensive frames. So if you've got good frames, wooden frames, try and restore them. In our house, we actually moved to vacuum glazing, which is kind of like triple glazing, but without the thickness, and that worked very well. And again, if you're interested in these sort of things, get in touch with me, because if there's one thing I'm really proud of and pleased with, it's the vacuum glazing that we put in our house. It's been brilliant. Okay. Floor insulation. Yeah, okay. What you got to do if you've got a suspended floor. If you've got a solid floor, then you're probably looking at putting some sort of insulation below any surface that you then put onto the floor, and that will raise the floor a little bit. So you have to take that into account. If you've got suspended floor, what you can do is what I did is just go room by room, probably one every year or something like that, and take up the floorboards, insulate underneath, and then put the old or new floorboards back down again. The technology here is moving forwards. The first room I did, it was netting between the joists to suspend the insulation. Now there's more sophisticated things where you can get fabrics to put between the joists, and that avoids things like sloughing, where the insulation starts to go towards the center of the gaps between the joists, and you lose the benefits at the edges. So there's and the other thing these fabrics do is that they stop so-called wind washing, which is where you're supposed to have air movement underneath your house, because that stops moisture collection in the crawl space between your floors. So you want that. That's why you're leaving the air bricks open as well, to maintain that. But that so-called the movement of that air can cause wind washing, which can cool the insulation down and lose some of its effect. So as I say, the technology has moved on, and what you'll find is if you do projects like this, by the time you do it the third time, you're much better. My wife always said we should own a row of terraced houses and live in the last one, because I get better at doing it as I kind of move along. Or let's say I make a lot of mistakes at the first one. Anyway, so I talked about sloughing and putting battens there to hold the insulation up, avoid wind washing, maintaining that the ventilation below the floors. But again, the most important thing is that you're closing the gaps where the cables come up to the electricity sockets, or if there's pipes come up for the radiators, you want to close off those gaps. And then when you put it back down again, you can either put new floorboards or replace the old ones. So the pictures there are just showing some of the work. And you can see the top one there, how close to the joists the insulation is. So therefore it's stopping any gaps around the side. Thank you, Fran, if you can move on. At this stage, one of the things I'd like to come on to right at the end is just planning ahead. But if you are going to do something like that, you might consider underfloor heating. I didn't. I'm not really bothered that I didn't, because the radiators we have now are doing a perfectly adequate job. But some people like the feel of underfloor heating, so it's something to consider at this stage. Okay, and the next one. Outside, you can internal or external insulation on walls. You'll see some work that was being done on the one side of my house. I didn't get the whole of the house done. I got two sides of it done. And this was work in progress. And you can see where they put the insulation on, and then the render is going to go on top of that. So methods available. Outside means it doesn't disrupt you inside. It's a bit more, it's more expensive. So you have to balance these various factors. So just please click on the, as I say, the cost, the disruption, and yeah, those are the main ones. And, I agree, it's not cheap. Most insulation gets done when people extend their houses. And a study that I saw that had been done in Cambridge recently said that actually most energy saving gets lost after 2 or 3 years. It's not because the house is less efficient, it's just that people then have extended their house, extended their space, and therefore the more energy gets used because of that space. But that's still better, because at least therefore the extended space was being heated by a similar amount of energy. Okay. A little bit here about chimney insulation. Maybe this is a little bit of a bugbear of mine, but I did all this insulation on the outside of the house and thought, I've got 3 columns of cold air in the house that come all the way down from the chimney, where they're open to the outside air, and they go all the way down to the fireplace, which weren't in use anymore. So I thought, why go and insulate the outside of the house and then leave these cold stacks in the middle? So what you can do here is you can cap the top of the chimney. You'll see the picture of the chimney at the top. You see the little wire. Can you go back on that one? Where it's been capped at the top, closed off at the bottom by having a so-called register plate that's installed where you see where the shoes are just underneath. And then the way I filled the chimneys was by just drilling a hole in the attic, in the loft, and pouring the insulation down there. So it's I won't say it's a cheap thing to do, but and is it cost effective? Well, it depends what you're looking for. Do I want a return on investment with everything I do? I'd say not really. There's a lot of things I do in life that I don't look at a return on investment, but I feel much more comfortable, and the house is more comfortable by having done this. Okay. But you've done all this stuff. Now you don't forget the insulation, because what you don't want to do is make a really tight house and find that none of the moisture gets out, and you've got maybe some cold surfaces still, and you start to get problems with ventilation. But you can avoid this, and that's really by trying to make sure there are no cold surfaces. If you want to click on with that, please. So avoid condensation for the reasons of health, protecting the health of the building as well. For safe use as well, if you've got a wood stove, obviously you need to make sure that there's good ventilation into the room where you're burning the fossil fuel, to clear smells away, to reduce infection risks. Poor ventilation is hazardous, costly, and unsightly. What you don't want to do, for instance, is to insulate your floors and then discover 20 years later that there's some mold down there because you haven't left a good airflow down there. So just think about this when you're doing work. Next one, please. So don't block air bricks, vents, or grills I was talking about before. Put extractor fans in or trickle vents above windows. You click on here if you want, Fran. And so, a couple of places where our utility room is, where we've got, we're trying to dry clothes during the winter time rather than outside. Put in an extraction fan. You can use a dehumidifier as well, which means at least then you're not blowing that expensively heated hot air out into the outside world. So that's another way of doing it. But don't block these things and install where you feel you need it. Next one, please. Other ways to fight condensation is reducing the moisture in your home. Obviously, in any house where there's more people, you're going to get more moisture. So that's when it will be particularly relevant, because bodies produce moisture, but also activity produces moisture as well. So avoid hanging clothes to dry indoors. Well, we do it, and you just got to find solutions to it, because I don't want to use the dryer too much in winter. Put lids on pans and simmer gently. I got a brother who lives with me, and boy, will he put a pan of water on and turn it up high and not put a pan lid on top. It's a work in progress persuading him to do that. Extractor fans and tickle vents we talked about, and if you still have them and the walls are wet, consider other things like leaky gutters. If the water is going on the inside of the gutter, it can cause a wet wall, and a wet wall can lead to problems with mold, etc. Or overflowing water butts. I've had all of these issues in my house at one time or another. Thank you. Next one. And then, consider as well, if you don't want to have too many fans pulling hot air outside, consider the idea of maybe once a day just opening the windows and having a 10 to 15 minutes so-called shock ventilation, which takes out the stale air. You can close it up, and then for the next day you can have a nice warm house. So this comes from advice from the Centre for CSE. Okay, installing ventilation. What can I add here? In our roof, we installed, you see the top right there, you can see the small little vents that we put under the fabric of the roof. That was to avoid getting condensation on the cold roof in the loft. Installing vents and fans when appropriate, and just using them when appropriate, not all the time. Thank you. And the next one. Okay, finally then, or second to the last thing, plan ahead. When you're doing work, think about what you could do then that might be preparation for a future. And I'll just give you some examples here if you want to just click through these. So as I say, I had a heat pump put in. I had to put the pipes in to extend from the heat pump to where the old boiler was. That required going under the floor through the crawl space under the floor. I wish I'd done it before I put the floor down, then I wouldn't have to cut into the floor again and put it in. But if I'd done that before and thought about this, where the future heat pump might be sited, I might have put some insulated pipe in beforehand. power cable runs. You need to get cable from the water cylinder and the controls down to where the heat pump is. For me, that required getting into the center of the house to where one end of the pipe, the cable was. Again, if I'd done that earlier, I wouldn't have had to been drilling holes, but it was doable, but it would have been easier. Electric charger, I was clever here. I thought about this and put a cable in under the floor so that when we did get a EV charger put in, the cable was already there. Didn't have to rip up the floor or drill holes in it. This is a great one. We've got some small solar panels on our roof. Pigeons love them. There's a great place to nest underneath. So if you're getting solar panels put in, just ask the people to put some pigeon guard around it. It costs 20 pence for the mesh to put there, but it stops you having to get more scaffolding. And also when you put scaffolding up, take advantage of it. Get those chimneys pointed that where the brickwork isn't good. Maybe cap the chimneys, paint the outside of the window frames. Just take advantage while it's there. And last but not least, you warmed your house, but don't forget to warm yourself as well. That's the most efficient way. After this presentation, I'll go down and watch television and I'll put a blanket around myself. It just means you don't have to keep the temperature as high as we need to. So just putting layers on yourself, insulate yourself rather than as well as the house, let's say. So various methods available. And then I think if you can go on to the next slide, please.
Time is running.
There we go. And there we are. That's my
Perfect.
non-sexy part. I'll leave it now to Bart to move on to the sexy part. Thank you.
Sorry, do you want to take a question in from Hermione that came to the chat? What is the fabric manufacturer or supplier for suspended floor insulation? Did you catch what I said?
So say again, sorry.
What is the fabric manufacturer supplier for suspended floor insulation?
Oh, right. Okay. Well, there's two parts to this. One is the actual insulation itself. In my case, I think I used rock wool, which is kind of that fairly felt-like substance. It's quite rigid, and therefore it fits nicely. Early on, I used the sort of like loft rolls, and that's just a bit too sloppy. So I can give links to where this comes from. That's for the insulation. You're dealing with other things as well, like the fabric that I was talking about, and there's some specialist suppliers for that. And again, if you want, I can give you the links to that. One's in, I think it's an Irish company that produces some very good stuff. So there's various parts of it, but I can certainly let you know them all.
Super. And that's it for question for the first part. Yeah, as we go, while you think about your questions, feel free to put them in the chat and monitor, and keep some time at the end for after Bart's presentation. Go through them.
Yeah, thank
But
you.
over to you, Bart.
Okay, thank you. Now, being plugged as having to present the sexy bit, I maybe should have taken a different theme to my slides, and I do hope I can live up to it. I fear the worst. Anyway, there we go. Home energy savings without breaking the bank. That's what I'm going to talk to you about. My first thing is that before going on about saving energy, you might first want to find out, where does your hard-paid energy actually go? We all buy energy. We get reminded monthly from most of us by the energy bill. But do we actually know where it goes? Because it's hard to start saving when you don't know where it ends up. And that is the main thing I would like to encourage you to do, if you haven't already, is to take meter readings. Of course, monthly readings are basically good enough. More frequently is nice, but you don't really have to dive into the meter cupboard every day. And of course, there's nowadays a lot of people have smart meters. And although that has a very nice display and can display all kinds of bar graphs, it's hard to really get to the numbers and compare year on year use, you know, at some point the smart meter is very smart, but its memory is not infinite. It will forget things. As you can't look back 2 years, say like, oh, did I, you know, I've made all these improvements. Is my energy use actually lower than last year, or is it not? Some suppliers issue monthly bills with meter readings on them, mostly by email now, so you can look it back. But I think the most convenient thing is the old school, writing it down yourself or putting it in a spreadsheet somewhere. Because it's very simple. Seasonal variations, they will tell you about the difference in heating energy use, you know, in winter, and also it will tell you about hot water in summer, or cooking if you're cooking using gas for cooking. And also what's very interesting, I think, is note down the meter readings before and after going away, notably electricity, because that will tell you something about how many idle power your house consumes, how many things are still on even while you're away, and how much energy does that leach out of the grid. And for example, these are the energy readings I took in 2016. Now, of course, every house is different. I was lucky enough to have solar hot water installed, but I did use gas for heating the cooker and the oven. And the nice thing about gas is, of course, there's very few appliances actually using it. But what you can tell from this plot already is that it's very obvious that in the summer months, there's no, there's solar hot water plenty. There's no heating going on. So that is actually what I use for cooking. And in the grand scheme of things, if you look at these plots, is it really worth saving on the number of pizzas you make? I would say not really. If you're looking at the big savings, that is where the big energy goes, namely in the winter months. That's heating. And then there is the mystery of the shoulder months, of course, but I assume that to be the hot water. You know, when the heating is on, it's not really, space heating is not really needed yet, but you do need hot water, and that's what it's used for. So actually from these simple readings, I can extract already quite a lot of information. And if I do that, and forgive me for using early 2022 prices, I arrive at the following. If you, my cooking, the gas for a month is £2.50. It's about the same as hot water for a week. And twice that is close to my winter heating for a day. So if I'm going to sort of start to economize and start to save things, again, cooking fewer pizzas is not the solution. It's the winter heating. And of course, Martin went on a bit about what to do for insulation. And that's where the big savings are. Then you can ask yourself, is my bill high? Is it low? Am I average? You know, it's difficult if you're already very efficient to save more, but you know, what is normal? If you're looking at homes that use gas for providing heat, for space heating, hot water and cooking, although of course, you know, heating and hot water could use oil or electric, and cooking could be electric. A lot of people have electric cooking. Then if you're looking at typical gas use in 2024 prices, this slide I did update. So it's 9,000 kilowatt hours is the gas bill, which is a consumption. Of course, that excludes any sort of standing charge you hear much about these days, of about between 550 and 600 pounds. Then the same for hot water. The UK average is 2,600 kilowatt hours, which is about 160 pounds. And then there is the cooking, which is 30 pounds per year. So again, it's clear where the big savings are to be had, but these figures give you an idea like, oh, you know, where do I sit in this scheme? I have to admit that there's a bit of a discrepancy between, well, this is only gas, of course, so that explains the discrepancy between what you know, the energy savings trusts say the average household bill is, and these numbers, because this is just, of course, only gas. Then for electricity, that is a bit harder to say where it actually goes. There is so many users. Of course, your smart meter, again, it displays usage on the spot. It displays cost if you have one that is linked in with the tariffs, and it has some memory. You can, most of the time you can see what you've used in the week or a few weeks ago, but you can't really compare with the same week a year ago. I see in the chat that there is indeed apps that you can link up with your smart meter, and then sometimes you can look at that data, but it really depends on your supplier whether that is supported or not. We were sold that when it was introduced that we could all do this, but you have to be a bit tech savvy to sort of get that going nowadays. Sometimes you wonder, you know, how much is my vacuum cleaner or how much is my TV using? Maybe that's just my quirk, but you can get these socket power monitors that sort of plug into your wall socket, and you can plug in an appliance in that, and then you can monitor that individual appliance. It's quite useful to see, you know, which ones take a lot of energy and how much that actually is. Now there's a game, and I've tried to play it myself, and it is really hard. Try to get your home to zero, because that will require you to think about, because the you switch off the obvious things, and then there's still quite a lot. There's still 150 watts or so, and then you think like, what else is there? Oh yeah, that thing I plugged in my bedroom, you know, alarm clock, whatever. And you have to go around the house and unplug or switch off all these little things, and then only then can you get to zero. It's not easy, and it's quite instructive to see it all come back up again when you plug them in or switch them on. But I never really got to zero exactly. There was always 10, 15 watts somewhere. So again, smart meters are great, but they don't tell you all it does, like gas. And if you compare electricity use, if you just do the sums, you know, there's these bits that are these devices that are maybe not very powerful, but they can lead electricity all day long, 24/7, all the time. For example, television on standby, especially older types, lighting in areas you don't really visit very often, and computers, of course. So watching TV for 2 hours, because you never watch TV for 5 minutes, I guess it's always quite long, is 8p. Again, that is, I'm not sure what that is, 22 or 24 prices, but that's just the ballpark. And then you've got the powerful appliances that are on for a short amount of time. And sort of, you know, the kettles, washing machines, the vacuum cleaners. So a full kettle is actually not that expensive, 5p, but you know, vacuuming at full power, that can take quite a bit. That is, I was surprised by this, that, you know, an average short vacuum takes 20p, which is like 4 full kettles. I would not thought that would be the case. So again, if you want to save energy, you can compare against national averages, but also what you can do is look at your EPC. That is your energy performance certificate. You might have forgotten about this because you only really need one when you buy a house or you sell a house, but then you don't care anymore because it's not your house any longer. So it is an assessment, and I must say some stand the test of time better than others. It is an assessment of what is the cost of running your home on the left with the rainbow colors, and its CO2 footprint. Now the funny thing is that it is all about cost, and of course electricity is 3 times as expensive as gas for a unit of energy. So it is not so big on saving gas because it's very cheap. It focuses mostly on saving electricity, and even if you change from, say, direct electric heating into gas, that will raise your EPC because it gets cheaper, even though you might not use any less energy, which is a bit funny. So just to say, it's not perfect. It's also based on many assumptions and averaging. You know, if your house is a bit out of the ordinary, and basically which house isn't, then it might not apply 100%. But still, I would say it is worth comparing your energy bills against the EPC predictions, because in that document is a prediction, however old it is, to say like, okay, your annual running cost is so and so much. And there might be some bits of advice in there that on how to improve the efficiency of your home. Some of it makes more sense than others. For example, the one for my house, when I came to live here, it was very fashionable to have a little wind turbine. So mine says, look, well, if you really want to improve your efficiency, you should bolt a wind turbine to your house. That's gone out of fashion a little bit, and it turns out not to be so effective. So I thought it was quite funny that it was in there, because now nobody talks about those anymore. Well, never mind Martin referring it as a sexy bit. Sometimes saving energy doesn't sound like much fun. It's a lot of effort for a few pennies per day. That is probably true, but you could also ask yourself, what is the cost of doing nothing? What will your future self be paying? Because I know one thing about energy costs, they only seem to go one way, and it's actually not down. So yes, you could do nothing, but then you will pay for the same units of energy, and those units will get more and more and more expensive. The nice thing about energy saving measures is that you do them once, like Martin's floor insulation, which is disruptive and a lot of tedious hard work, but after that you profit forever, every day. And some of these pay for themselves in less than one winter. Those are the most popular ones. The cylinder jackets Martin was talking about is one winter and you're done. I would say even the cavity wall insulation in most cases sounds expensive, certainly not zero cost, but that is 1 or 2 winters, maybe 3, and then it pays for itself. And that sort of doesn't take into account the gain you get from increasing comfort, because nobody talks about comfort, how much that costs, because you can't say how it is. So I would say sooner is better with these energy saving measures. And of course, if you add them all up, you're talking pounds and not pennies, which is all very important. The hardest ones are the ones that actually need a change of habits to be effective. Yeah, this is where I sometimes feel like a failure when I can't sort of do this, but that's the you can at least try. So talking about a few zero cost home energy improvements, that is just tweaking the stuff you already have. And the biggest user here is your boiler. Most of us, if we have a boiler, and I'm talking a gas boiler, not an oil boiler, we're talking combi boilers or condensing boilers. These are very efficient, but only under the right conditions. If you treat them badly, they can use up to 10-15% more. What is the right conditions? The right conditions means the flow temperature is set to 65 degrees or lower. That is a rule of thumb, so it might vary a little bit. There's another game that can be played in the winter, so to see how low you can set the flow temperature of your boiler, because boilers get more efficient when the flow temperature is set lower. Can you go to 60? Is your house still comfortable at 60? Try 55. The only thing is, of course, there's a link there which explains the theory behind it and the sort of more practical implications. But do keep in mind that if you have a hot water cylinder, they do need a Legionella cycle. So then you can't go lower than, say, 60 thereabouts. I have to warn you that if you're not sure about doing this, boilers need annual maintenance, and you can ask your boiler technician to explain how to set your flow temperature. They will usually advise against this. Why? They don't pay the bills and they want you to have a warm home under all conditions. But if you want to save money, or if you want to run your boiler at the most efficient settings, regulating it down does make a difference. But you have to, of course, when you do get cold on specifically cold winter days, you might have to remember to dial it up a little bit. So more thoughts on heating. Of course, there's a few very obvious remarks, sorry, but they are the zero cost home energy savings. So you could, heat your home part of the day, but you have to allow for time for the heating system to get the house up to temperature. Martin was also referring to heat certain groups of rooms less. Kitchens got lots of heat produced when cooking, so there's no need to heat it up to super comfortable temperatures and you start baking cakes shortly after. Most people like bedrooms a bit colder, but you have to remember when you do this that there's no internal insulation in your floor spaces and your walls, so you do have to keep your doors shut. You could also consider, when your house layout is inviting to that kind of thing, to not heat the first floor or the left side of the house or whatever. And then there's the thermostatic radiator valves. They are quite simple devices, but they do limit the heat output, so they stop the waste of heat. One thing I can't recommend highly enough is to subscribe to the borrowing scheme for the thermal imaging cameras with carbon footprint. The link is in the slides. That is really very much an eye-opener. The season is about to start. You need to sit through an instruction set and then you can borrow the camera. There's multiple cameras available, hosted at different locations. So I would really recommend you to have a go. And the nice thing about it, it's zero cost. Draft busting, Martin already talked about it, especially in combination with the thermal camera use on a winter windy day. That is very effective. I haven't got any more to say about this, what Martin didn't already say, except that I'm very forgetful. So if you go hunting for your drafts, write them down or take a picture with your mobile phone, because then you can address them as and when. You don't have to do it on the spot and you still remember where they are. And of course, Martin's already said it, don't block up the vents. And there's a link to a very nice site that deals with the obvious, but also the very non-obvious of these draft busting practices. Now, moving from low cost home energy improvements to from zero cost, sorry, to low cost home energy improvements. Again, I'm focusing on the biggest user, and that's boilers. And there you've got boiler controls. On the left, you'll see a very, probably very familiar, but very old controller. The funny thing is, when you need a new boiler, the boiler technicians change the boiler and sometimes leave the old controls, like the one in the bottom left, in place, whereas the boiler doesn't really work with that very well. Controls can make a very big difference, and especially a modern boiler with old controls is not a very efficient combination. They can be much more efficient if they are driven by a somewhat more controller. Most of these are drop-in replacements. They don't need extra cables or this and that. It's just very simple, and there are solutions for every budget. Yeah, there's very smart ones with all kinds of digital integration, self-learning, sensors to see if you're home or not, and shut down the heating automatically. But there's also ones that just have a more accessible weekly timer built in. And of course, again, there's the thermostatic radiator valves. But don't forget to not fit a TRV, thermostatic radiator valves, on the radiator next to the thermostat, because otherwise the thermostat can heat the house all at once, but it will never switch off, which is not what it's intended to do. I think Martin talked about hot water cylinders. Hot water can be put nicely on a timer, because most of the time these hot water cylinders hold hot water for much longer than you think. So you might not have to run them in the morning and the evening. Just one part of the day would be enough. The cylinder jackets save between £30 of gas and £100 of electric if you're having electric hot water a year. So that's quite a bit. And you don't have to buy a dedicated cylinder jacket. Sleeping bags are a bit tricky to store, but this is a nice solution. If you like camping in summer, then this is the place where the sleeping bag should go in the winter. And while you're at it, you can lag the pipes. I think Martin also already talked about low cost installation. There is radiator foils, very low cost. Don't expect any miracles, but please don't forget to fit them on the radiators that are on walls that face the outside world at the other end, external walls. You can see the picture on the top right there, where the glowing bit that at the 9.2 sign, that's the the outside of a solid wall on which on the other side a radiator sits. It's quite clear. Well, there's the same pictures Martin used for the loft installation, and there's a cavity wall installation. Depending on where you live and other metrics, there might be grants available for these things. I have to say that the grant schemes are sometimes difficult to navigate, but I think within Cambridge Carbon Footprint, there's quite a lot of knowledge about which grants would apply depending on where you live. More radical ideas. Sorry for, it's maybe obvious suggestions. You can turn down the heating to really cold at night, a bit before bedtime. At some point, you will want to go to bed because it gets really chilly. And again, the hot water cylinder, you might want to just switch it off for a day and see how long it lasts, how much hot water you actually use. And then you might discover that it is longer than you think, and you don't need to heat it every day to enjoy hot water most of the days. There's more ideas, and a very extensive list can be found on the Cambridge Carbon Footprint website. So, in summary, I really hope, and my intention was to have given you ideas for actions to not fall into the cost of doing nothing trap. Because if you take action, well, tonight is maybe a bit late, neighbors might not like it very much, but tomorrow that will allow you to start saving energy immediately. find out where your energy goes would be the first step if you don't do that already. Or if you do it already by means of a smart meter or your bills, write them down and have a look where it actually goes. How much is your use? Compare it to your EPC if you can still find it, or some sort of national averages. The Energy Savings Trust has got some very good information on their website. And then once you know how much goes where, try to address your energy use where you can, and start with the biggest users, the boilers. Think about your controls, maybe ask some open ecohomes host or your boiler technician what could be improved, trying to lower your flow temperature. And then there's the low hanging fruit. I think Martin's talked about it extensively, so I'm not going to go through that again. And keep in mind that electricity is a lot more expensive than gas. So once you've done the gas big users and you've optimized your boiler controls and you've dialed down the flow temperature, it's time to look at electricity use, because a small saving might result in quite a lot of money saved. And then it's changing habits, which is very difficult. And the last line, unfortunately, is copied from the slide when I was first and Martin was second. So that doesn't apply anymore. And that's it from me.
Thank
Right,
you.
okay, we've got a couple of minutes. I noticed I left a question behind earlier. Maybe it's addressed to Martin or one of you anyway. We had 11 new radiators installed when a new heat pump was installed this May. Can 20mm Celotex be used to insulate behind radiators?
20mm Celotex is excellent. It's mostly foil backed, so you get the reflective properties as well as a very high insulation value, because Celotex is per unit of thickness 50% better than mineral wool. So it is an excellent, if you can get it 20mm thick Celotex, then please use it. Yes.
Just Hermione had a comment which you addressed, Fran, but a good one, mentioning curtains as Draught excluders or new thermal linings. Because yeah, these are good points.
Yep. Yeah, very good point.
I'll never forget my gran having those sausage things, the sausage dogs things that go over the bottom of the door as well. Genius, love them.
Yeah, maybe I should, for the next time, I should include a few more of those, because it's a thing I do overlook. It's a fine balance though with curtains. We used to have windows that were very badly insulating, and then we got a lot of condensation also on the curtains, so they didn't last very long. So even curtains do need some ventilation not to get moldy if you use them as draft excluders, or to block off some cold vent.
And not to cover radiators either, of course.
No, yes, very good point.
I would suggest as well, one of the things that we did for years before doing our house was have the thing that takes the water out of the air.
Dehumidifier.
Dehumidifier. Sorry, brain
Yep.
just went then. Yeah, dehumidifier, which was brilliant for drying the stuff indoors, but also having your humidity lower just really helps to make it feel warmer as well. It feels
Yes.
a lot more comfortable, a lot warmer, and just prevents that issue. And they're not that expensive to run, really. They're really not very expensive to run. And the water you can chuck on your plants. So
Yeah, because otherwise your plants wouldn't like it very much, low humidity.
exactly. But thank you, Martin. Thank you, Bart. Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you all for coming.
Okay. Take care, everybody.
Everyone.
Bye.